Happy Pride, everyone, and welcome back to Empowered and Out, the career coaching podcast where we talk about purpose, confidence, authenticity, and what it really means to thrive in your career while being fully yourself. I'm your host, Coach John, founder of Empowered and Out Coaching and creator of the new Empowered Career Transformation Program. This program is designed for professionals who feel stuck, burned out, disconnected, underconfident, or uncertain about their next career move. Through my purpose to placement framework, I help clients move from confusion and self-doubt into clarity, confidence, strategy, and aligned action. Because here's the truth. Career transformation is not just about updating your resume or applying to more jobs. It is about understanding who you are now, what you actually want, how to rebuild your confidence, and how to position yourself for opportunities that align with your values, strengths, and next chapter. And today's conversation connects so deeply to that work. Today's guest is Ryan DeLuca, Managing Director of 25th Hour Regulatory Consulting. Ryan brings almost 20 years of experience in regulation, investigations, compliance, adjudication, and professional development. His work supports regulators, investigators, inspectors, and compliance professionals by helping them strengthen investigative practices, reduce bias, improve decision-making, and approach their work with fairness, neutrality, and confidence. He has also published work on investigative bias, instructs for the Council on Licensure, Enforcement, and Regulation, and helps certify regulatory investigators and inspectors across North America. On top of that, he sits as an adjudicator on a provincial regulatory hearing and appeals panel. But beyond the impressive professional background, what I'm really excited about today is a conversation behind the resume. We're going to talk about Ryan's experience as an LGBTQ plus professional and entrepreneur, what it means to navigate conservative spaces, how bias shows up both personally and professionally, and why confidence, allyship, and fairness matter so much in the current climate. Ryan, welcome to the podcast. I'm really glad to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
So before we get started, Ryan, I like to do an energy check-in with all of my guests. So on a scale from 1 to 10, how is your energy today and what's contributing to that number?
Oh, it's a good question. We're early in the morning. I've had my coffee. I'm going to say 8 or 9. I think anytime I sort of get to share information, especially when I get to speak about things that I'm really passionate about, my energy level goes up. Caffeine sort of
Nice.
doubles that effect. So I think we're doing good.
Awesome. I like that. I would say I'm kind of in between an 8 and a 9 as well. I mean, we're near the end of the week as we record this, but honestly, my energy is awesome. Like I'm excited, I'm pumped. Obviously, I just promoted my new program that's coming out. I'm excited and I'm excited for our conversation and to connect and let the listeners listen in, or for those who watch it on YouTube to view it as well. So
Amazing.
all right. So, Ryan, for listeners who are meeting you for the first time, can you share a little bit about who you are, the work you do, and what led you into regulatory consulting, investigations, and compliance?
Yeah, it's such a weird, windy route that got me to where I am today. So, when I was in university and trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and this was a long, long time ago, I went through the anthropology route, right? I started studying anthropology and I had these sort of visions in my head of going to, you know, Egypt and digging up mummies and doing all of this interesting stuff, none of which came to fruition after I finished. And it was on a trip. I was living in Toronto at the time, and it was on a trip to Vancouver, BC, where I was speaking with some friends of mine who lived out there who were in sort of the real estate field. And they suggested, real estate was this amazing, career path for them. It allowed them to sort of build their own business, do as much work or as little work as they wanted to do. I was always an avid fan of those HGTV shows, right? You have House Hunters and all of that. And I thought, wow, that sounds really, really interesting. So I got my real estate license and started doing that. And after over a decade of selling real estate, I had moved provinces. So from British Columbia to Alberta to Calgary, where I am today. And the thought of sort of building from the ground up again didn't really appeal to me at the time. And the provincial regulatory body that governed the real estate industry in the province was hiring. So I had applied as an entry level investigator position, and that really started the career path through regulatory investigations and ultimately into launching my own regulatory consulting firm many years after that.
Nice. I am a addict of the home renovation shows. So, but I will say this, it helped when we picked our condo because we'd seen all these shows. We saw what was good, what was bad, what to look for.
Yeah.
And so it really did help. And it was kind of fun when we got to experience on one of the properties that the property that we ended up not getting, but we were there with the
Makes sort of the regulatory investigation side interesting because it was in the real estate world. And you sort of, as you're buying your own properties, even if you're renting properties, you start to see sort of some of the misconceptions or
Mhm.
misrepresentations that may be made by the owners of the property. And then what do you do afterwards? How do you protect yourself if you've been harmed? And so it was sort of another way to sort of work in the industry without being on the sales side, but still sort of contribute to the overall benefit of the industry. That really drew me to it.
So, how has your work shaped the way that you understand people, behavior, and bias with what you do?
So investigations is interesting because it really is a practice and a study of being able to read people. And I think sort of coming from the LGBT community, we develop a skill through years of masking who we are before we're ready to come out and trying to fit in. We become a great read of other people. And so I think that really gave me a leg up, even starting out in investigations. And so I think I would say that the ability to read other people, to sort of get a sense for when someone is potentially either not telling me the truth at all or telling me the full truth, the ability to sort of question people and poke holes in stories where I think something may not be completely accurate. Or, when we do investigations, we don't necessarily, we have this idea in our head that we're always looking for signs of deception in everyone else. And it's not really what we're doing. What we're doing is we're looking for things called stress indicators. So changes in behavior when we're speaking to someone. And we become such good readers of that body language, as we grow up, it's sort of hiding who we are until we're more comfortable in our own skin and we come out, that part of the job really became what I was good at. I was really good at sitting down with someone and sort of figuring out where I needed to ask more questions, where, suddenly the stress levels may shift, or the way they were speaking to me or the way they were moving or the way they were changing in how they were interacting with me was a sign that there was something I needed to dig a little bit more into. And that was a skill that was more intuitive to me, I think, than perhaps some other people who are sort of starting off in that role. And building on that, I really realized that this was something I was quite good at and sort of grew my career from there.
Nice. I like that. And I would agree. I feel that with our potential masking of ourselves, I feel that we do kind of have a little bit different perspective when we're looking at people, be it personally or professionally, just because it does give us a little bit, maybe a leg up. For me, I mean, I feel like I'm a pretty good judge of character overall. Wasn't initially, but back when I was in my teens and 20s, but I would say now being in my 50s, I'm a pretty good judge of character. But yeah, I think for me, it makes sense. Like being a part of this community, you really observe a little bit probably stronger than the average of our fellow cisgender like community. They're not looking probably as strongly as we are.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think we just have this natural instinct to ensure that we're safe in the
Yeah.
environment that we're putting ourselves in and that we find ourselves in, that a lot of maybe people who identify as heterosexual or sort of grow up in the mainstream community never really have to develop that skill the same way we do. And I do
Mhm.
think it's a skill that, later in life comes in handy, whether it's, doing investigative work or whether it's just interacting with anybody in any sort of career path. You become a great read of people. And I think that really does helps you sort of develop the skill set you need much faster in a lot of career paths than maybe not having that.
I would agree. All right. So you've spent nearly 20 years in regulation, investigations, compliance, and adjudication. How has being part of the LGBTQ plus community influenced you the way you move through professional spaces?
Yeah, that was tough. So I think, when we think of investigations, a lot of people sort of think about policing, or they don't usually think about regulatory investigations, but they're very similar in a lot of respects, different in some as well. But we sort of see it as an industry of very sort of, closed off, very tough personalities, this sort of macho kind of demeanor, and it's intimidating. And it was one of the things that sort of scared me when I first started off on this career path, not only in terms of the people that I was working with, that I was worried that maybe they wouldn't accept me or maybe would assume that I couldn't do the job as well as them because of how they perceived me, but also in terms of the people you're working with or that you're investigating. You may be investigating individuals who are also being charged with criminal offenses that are particularly heinous. You may be interviewing witnesses who are involved in criminal enterprises like money laundering and biker gangs and all sorts of things. And so that scared me. And I think at the very beginning, I let it hold me back because I didn't know how to assert any sort of dominant personality when I needed to take control of a situation. And that was something that came as I started to realize and work with other investigators that I maybe had some skills that they didn't have, and they had skills that I had. And I became more confident in the work I was doing. I was able to become a lot more assertive. And the idea that someone was going to judge me because, they saw right away in interacting with me that maybe or assumed I was gay, that became less important to me. And it didn't really matter to me anymore. And I think the more confident I became, the less I worried about what another person's perspective of me was going to be. But that took time. And I think, in investigations with all new investigators, there's always that apprehension at the beginning because you are dealing with, a lot of times you're dealing with just people who made small mistakes, and these are great people and there's no issues. But you do every now and then get those investigations where you're dealing with people who are intimidating, and every investigator, regardless of whether you're straight, gay, or otherwise, has to sort of find their way in dealing with those personality types and being able to assert their own confidence. I thought for me it was maybe a little bit harder because, in addition to everything else, being a new investigator, wanting to make sure I was doing a good job, the fear of someone judging me or assuming that I was less capable because I was gay was also something I had to get over. But I ultimately did. And that confidence just grew with experience. And I think it's one of those things where, as much as other people tell you, just be confident in who you are, you can do it and you're great and you're this and you're that, until you really build that confidence yourself. It's one of those things you have to go through it. I don't know that there's an
Mhm.
easy way around it. You just kind of have to put yourself in those situations. You have to sort of stretch your comfort zone a little bit and get out there and put yourself in those uncomfortable situations so that you almost become desensitized to them a little bit. And then you become more comfortable with what you're doing. And I think you become more confident in what you're doing and better at it as a result.
I like that and I agree. So, what helped you move from being aware of other people's perceptions to trusting your own expertise?
It's an interesting question. I think at the beginning, I was more focused on how I was being portrayed or how I was presenting myself. The tone of my voice would tend to drop, and I would make sure it would drop a little bit. My mannerisms would be very stiff, and I was so focused on it that I was less focused on cues that the other person was giving me in terms of their body language when they were answering questions or maybe some of the things they were saying. As I started becoming less focused on what I was doing and more focused on what the other person was doing, I think that was kind of the tipping point for me where I said, okay, now I know that I can get the job done. I know I can get the information I need. I know that even having those very difficult conversations that you sometimes have when you're doing interviews as part of an investigation, that I could get the information I needed. And it didn't matter, what I was doing. I wasn't concerned with what my hands were doing. I wasn't, concerned with what I sounded like in the moment. I was focusing on what I needed to do to get the job done or to get the information I needed. And once I sort of stopped focusing as much, that was sort of the key for me. And I think it was one day where I was doing a joint interview with another investigator. Sometimes we would sort of tag team, especially on difficult files, just because if you're taking notes, someone else can, may pick up on something that you didn't hear or whatever. They came out and said, that was amazing. Like, that was such a great interview. And I was sort of sat back and I was thinking, why? What made this one better than any of the other ones we had done? And, I don't know if this is what they were referring to, but I think in my own mind, I sort of said, you know what? I really didn't even think about myself this entire time. I didn't once think about what I was doing, how I was moving, what I sounded like. And from then on, it just didn't matter to me anymore. I was so focused on doing the job I was hired to do. And I felt much more comfortable doing it. And it was awesome. It was almost like this liberating experience at that point that, who cares, right? I can do this job. I am good at my job just as good as anybody else is. And that was a great feeling.
That's awesome. So, in our earlier conversation we had when we were having our little pre chat that we had prior to today, we talked about how initial perceptions of minority professionals can sometimes create barriers. What do you think people misunderstand about LGBTQ plus professionals in leadership, regulatory, or compliance spaces?
So I think there's this misconception that people who are members of the LGBT community are meek or soft or, more easily manipulated, more easily controlled. They don't stand up for themselves. They don't sort of have their own voice. And because of that, they may be more easily taken advantage of. And so I think anytime you're working in any career where you as an individual need to be the person in control, that is a big part of what you're doing. There's this view on the other side that you're not going to be able to do it because. Now, that being said, I think it's also true of the LGBTQ community that we internalize that from a very young age and we start to believe those things about ourselves as well, even though they're not true. So it's sort of, you're getting hit on both sides, your own
Totally.
internal sort of fears of what you can do and what you can't do and what other people are telling you or assuming you can do and can't do. And so I think really what has to happen is education around, success stories of people within the LGBTQ community to show that this isn't true, that we have LGBTQ folks in the military, in policing, in investigations, in construction, in any sort of job where typically we think we may not fit, we exist. And whether, there's anyone who's identifiably out in those spaces or not, doesn't mean we don't exist. Just because we may not know of someone in a particular field doesn't mean there's not anyone who's taking up one of those roles, who's maybe in the closet or hasn't been ready to come out. There's an amazing individual based out of Toronto, I believe, who was a professional hockey player, the first out professional hockey player. And now he goes around and he teaches NHL teams and other professional hockey teams about the importance of respect and shifting culture within the locker room and all of that sort of stuff to make hockey and organized sport a safe space for everybody. But before I had heard of him, I had not heard of anyone sort of in professional sports who was out of the closet that way. And so you would assume there was no one there, but there are. And I'm sure
Yeah.
there are a lot of others. So I think it's really getting people to understand that we are already existing in all of these spaces. So they need to change what they believe we can do. And then we have to start believing that ourselves. We have to start understanding we are capable of doing all these things.
I love that. And I agree with you. It's funny that I've seen through interviews of different athletes who have come out and they're like, oh, I'm not just the only one. They're just people that they have that fear that, oh, they're going to get dropped from the team or endorsements or whatever it might be. But really, I feel that just because of how large, in truth, our community is, it's going to actually get those who might have that fear of coming out if they are, do a sport or whatever it might be, even in the workplace, they might feel more comfortable. And I feel it's a great representation. I love seeing like different artists that come out and people are like, oh, really? And it's like, I would have never thought that. And it's like at the end of the day, especially athletically, who cares if they're helping you and they're talented and they're helping you win games or and hockey is winning the Stanley Cup or whatever it might be, then who cares what their sexual preference is? It doesn't matter. Like just because they happen to have the same sex or someone that they're going home to compared to the opposite from you, like who cares? It doesn't matter because they're not affecting your life. They're not
Yeah.
right there in the like where you are.
Yep.
But
I agree.
yeah,
I agree 100%.
and I think that is a little bit more confident in my stance on certain things like that, just because as I've gotten older. But I mean, I think that as someone who was in athletics, I think it would have been kind of cool to see that when I was younger, to see that. Now, I did see because I swam. I was a competitive swimmer. I knew there was a competitive diver. Greg Louganis is one of the most like famous out, not by choice divers. Like he had to come out due to such, but it was like, okay, I mean, and honestly, after being in the sport, oh goodness, there are so many more people there that are not out. But everyone has to be comfortable and feel right to be where they want to be. And if they feel that, have that fear, I kind of hope they get over it, because I feel they're going to have stronger support and representation no matter what people might say to them. Then they really will get that support.
And
But
you raise a
yeah.
really important point, and I think it's one of the reasons podcasts like yours are so important. I think visibility and representation in any industry is important because when other people who are younger and are realizing that maybe they're part of our community sort of see LGBT people, people who are similar to them, and I would say this is the same for BIPOC people. I would say this is the same for any minority group. When you see someone like you in movies, in sport, in different, construction, police, whatever it is that you sort of want to do, it's less of a concern for you to try and move
Hmm.
forward into that career because you don't feel like you have to hide yourself to the same extent as if you feel like you're all alone. You're the only one and all eyes are going to be on you. So I think it is really important.
So, what advice would you give to someone who feels underestimated because of who they are?
It's tough. I think it's gonna depend on, are you underestimated because people are actually telling you, that you are not good enough at what you do? Or do you feel like you're being underestimated because you have this sort of internal idea that everyone is judging you when they're not? And really, when I started out, it was a little bit of both. There were people, not that I worked with, but people I would interview at the beginning because I was so uncomfortable in my skin at the time, who would say things that would make me even more uncomfortable because they knew they could sort of derail interviews and things like that if they used it against me. Once I got more comfortable in my own skin, they stopped doing it because it didn't look like, they wouldn't assume that would work. In the workplace, if someone is actually saying something to you, it's important to note that you don't have to accept harassment or bullying
Hmm.
from anybody. So stand up for yourself. You don't have to take it. No one should ever have to take that sort of verbal abuse. If it's you feel you're being underestimated just because you have this internal sort of bias against yourself, you sort of think everyone's looking at me, everyone's judging me. And we often feel that way, especially when we're much younger or in a new situation around new
Hmm.
people. Then I think just doing your job the best you can and realizing that the outcomes of doing the best you can are just as good, if not better, than everybody else that you're working with will help build that confidence and it'll become less of an issue. You just have to keep putting yourself out there and you have to keep pushing through and you have to keep making sure that, you recognize and everyone else recognizes that you have a right to occupy the space in that career that you are occupying. If you didn't, you wouldn't have been hired, you wouldn't be in that role. The fact that you are there shows that you have that right to be there and you are good enough to be there, so you just have to own it. That's all you can really do.
Exactly. Couldn't have said it better. I mean, there is a reason you got hired.
Yeah.
So, yes, because of your job skills, most likely because of your job skills overall. I mean, yes, and I know this, I don't know how prevalent it is in Canada, but I definitely know with having family members that are in high executive levels, I do know that there have been in the past, maybe not right now due to the current political climate, but there used to be like a very much, oh, we need to hire this person because a diversity hire because of who they are. And I heard it specifically from a family member that said, they may not be the most qualified, but I do need them because they are a woman, because they're African American. I was like, and they said it'd be even better if she was a lesbian, but obviously we can't ask that. Obviously, in the interview, I'm like, no, you cannot. But I said, and that's sad. And she said, I know it bothers me because knowing that they're not the most qualified and the person that is most qualified is not of that, doesn't happen to have all of those check marks that the company wants. But I've been told, human resources told me I have to hire this. And I'm like, that's awful. But people are like we just said, like people are hired because of their perform, what their resumes speaks and says, but how they presented themselves in that interview to get that job. There was obviously a reason they liked your personality, your qualifications to put you in that role. So show it, show that you're good at what you're doing. And if you happen to be a proud member of our, community, great, show it in the workplace. Because I think, especially right now, that's even more important to show
Yeah.
than
And I
hiding it.
wear, like, I have a pride bracelet that I wear, and I
Awesome.
wear it in every interview. And my briefcase has, I don't know if you've ever seen the musical version of Beetlejuice, but at the play, they had this little pride beetle pin, and it has
Oh, nice.
sort of all the colors of the pride flag, and I have it on my briefcase, and I bring it into every, like, it doesn't matter to me anymore. And I think I would say, when we're talking about diversity hires and people who may not be as qualified, I would argue maybe that the vast majority of the time, at least in Canada, the vast majority of the time, it may be where that could be something a company is doing. They're still looking for a person who can do the job they need them to do. It doesn't benefit a
Yeah.
company to hire someone who is completely unqualified, who's ultimately going to either quit or have to, get fired or whatever because they can't do the job. So if you get hired, I agree with you. It is your skills, it is your personality. You're going through the interview processes. They know who you are. And I would say that even if you're nervous to sort of show who you are better off being your authentic self from the start so that you don't have to worry about trying to change your personality down the road. And if someone doesn't hire you because, you believe that you were maybe not hired because of who you are, you don't want to work for a company like that. Why would
Right.
you, right? You want to
Exactly.
find a company who's going to embrace you. And I think as time goes on, things get better and I think people become more open, even in more difficult political climates like we may find ourselves in now. I think, as each generation sort of comes forward, they're going to find it's easier and easier and less of an issue. But for some, it's still an issue now. And so, yeah, just, go out, go into whatever career path sort of makes you happy, find whatever job makes you happy. And when you land that role, it's because you are meant to be in that role. And, that's a success, and own it and be yourself and do the best you can.
I love that. And I agree with you 100% because I've talked about it, with my clients. I've talked about it here on the podcast. Authenticity is huge. Being your true authentic self. And I know sometimes it's not always possible,
Yeah.
but at least be at a level that if you're that uncomfortable to be your authentic self, you probably chose the wrong company to work for.
Yeah, I agree.
And I know that now it is a little bit harder, even more so this month being Pride Month, to tell if a company really is supportive of our community or not. But because that's what I always tell my clients and just tell, like, you need to check out that company. You need to see what they're doing, what they're showing. Do they support our community? Do they not? Are they just rainbow washing during Pride Month? Or can you see it throughout, like, their entire website? Can you find employees that potentially are, as representing our community just as much as you want to be? And I hope we never get to a point where you can't figure that out, but I also feel that there's enough companies out there that you're going to find the right place that you will be you will have the opportunity to be your true authentic self all the time, every day, 5 days a week, no matter what.
And I would really think that in sort of a more challenging political climate like we find ourselves in today, and you see companies pulling back from spending on sort of DEI initiatives or sponsoring pride events and things like that, the ones who are still coming forward, the ones who are still saying, no, we are still doing this and we are proud to do this and they're public about it, those are the ones you really know are dedicated to sort of supporting everybody in all communities. It's the ones who sort of say, well, we support Pride when it brings us more revenue because we get more clients or whatever. And then in the more difficult political times, it's no, we're going to pull back. We're not going to talk about it anymore. Everything is kind of getting hush hush that you sort of have to look at and say, well, but why? Why now? So yeah, I think this is a great time for that to sort of see who are the real allies.
I agree. So your work focuses heavily on reducing investigative bias and
Yeah.
improving decision making. When you think about bias in the workplace more broadly, where do you see it showing up most often?
So I think the problem is the vast majority of bias we face when we're dealing with other individuals are subconscious cognitive biases. They're biases people don't realize that they necessarily have. So a lot of times we grow up and we hear things from our grandparents and our parents, and those sort of assumptions that are made about other people kind of stick in our mind, and we carry that forward, and we don't necessarily go out intending to be biased against any particular group, but we do it anyways. The more overt conscious biases where you know you're doing something wrong and you're doing it anyways, those are the problematic ones, but those are almost the easier ones to deal with because you can call people out. It's when people don't know that they're doing it that it becomes more difficult, because sometimes when you call them out, it's almost like, they're offended by what you're saying because they don't realize they're doing it. And so I think when you're dealing with subconscious bias in the workplace, which is probably the vast majority of it, how we approach it has to be a little bit more nuanced than, calling people out on social media, videotaping them and saying, look what you did. Because sometimes it's not that they're trying to be biased. They are really coming from a good place and they don't know they're doing it. And this is more of an education opportunity. And so I think at that point, it's having those quiet conversations at first with the person, letting them know why what they've said or what they did or what they alluded to isn't appropriate and where the concerns may lie. And I've had success doing that. I've also had situations where it wasn't as successful because naturally people become defensive when you sort of have those conversations. And in the workplace, you obviously don't want to burn bridges between people you have to work
Hmm.
with every day. So you're going to have to kind of weigh what the best way to do this is. Is this a quiet conversation? Is this something where maybe it's not even a conversation with the person, but maybe, I'll give you an example. I had a situation where, and I can't remember exactly what they were talking about, and it wasn't even about LGBTQ people. It was against another minority group, and I can't recall who it was. But there was someone who was a member of that group in the meeting, and instead of calling the person out or pulling them aside, they just started talking and giving examples of challenges they faced as we were just having kind of open conversation. And I think the person who had made the offensive comment, you could just see the expression change on their face as they sort of realized, oh my gosh, did I actually? And then afterwards, that individual went up to the member of that group and said, you know what, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean that. I didn't even realize what I was saying. And it was a learning moment for them. And there was nothing dramatic about it. There was nothing over the top. It wasn't, splashed all over social media. It wasn't a complaint to HR. It was a great learning opportunity and allowed the person to change their behavior and be more cognizant of the things they were saying that maybe they didn't even realize they were saying at the moment, or the things that they were doing. I think, though, like I said before, when you're dealing with sort of that overt conscious bias, you have someone who is clearly homophobic, transphobic, whatever it happens to be, racist, that at times, you have to sort of gauge what's happening. And is it safe to call the person out in the moment? Is it a situation where you need to engage with human resources? And you're going to have to make that judgment call. You never want to put yourself in a situation where you're in danger, there's a safety concern, but at the same time you also don't have to take any sort of abuse in any workplace environment. So yeah, that would be my answer. It's all going to depend, but I would say the biggest area of concern would be those subconscious, unknown or unrealized biases that people have, and trying to help them sort of move past them.
So, how do you think professionals can start checking their own assumptions before making decisions about others?
That's a tough one. I think, we often say, oh, first impressions, are the most important. It's what matters most to us. And I think we kind of have to step back once we sort of form that first impression in our mind and ask ourselves, why do we have that first impression? Was it something the person did, or was it an assumption I'm making about that individual? So, if it's that the person came out the first time you met them and they've said something absolutely appalling, then that's a them problem. But if it's because you in your own mind just don't like them and you don't know why, you may have to sit down with yourself and say, and be uncomfortable for a while and say, what is it like? And how would I feel if someone just didn't like me for some unknown, obscure reason? And then really try and figure out what it is that made you feel uncomfortable about that person. And you may realize that, well, wait a minute, this is just something I've always thought. Like, I've always just assumed this group of people is lazy. This group of people is effeminate, and I don't like that. This group of people is off-putting for whatever reason. And that may just not be true. And in that case, I have to check myself. It's not the other person's problem to fix, it's my own, and I have to deal with it myself.
I agree. All right. So, We've obviously been teasing, said it many times about our current political climate, especially here where I am, but in the United States, just south of you. How do LGBTQ plus communities, especially our trans community members, unfortunately, right now, they're being used as scapegoats very strongly. From your perspective, why do you think that these marginalized communities are becoming targets during these tense political moments that we're a part of right now?
Yeah, I think it's an unfortunate side effect of us claiming our space. So I think anytime we become more vocal and we make ourselves more visible and we say we have a right to be here and we deserve to be here, we're going to see more and more challenges against the rights that we have. And so we see that going on around the world. So we have governments in place that are less sympathetic to the LGBT cause, maybe adversarial, completely adversarial to the LGBT cause. And those are the moments in time where we stand up, and it's important to stand up and say we have a right to be here. And when we do that, we find we're going to get more pushback. And that's okay. It means we just have to keep fighting. And it's very cyclical. If we sort of go back in history, we see this happen time and time again. But each time it gets a little bit better and it gets a little bit better. And so, before it was completely illegal to be gay, lesbian, transgender, you'd be thrown in jail. You could never be part of the army. There were a whole bunch of restrictions. It got a little bit better. And then the next set of challenges, while some of those rights may have been either stripped away or there may have been an attempt to strip them away, they weren't all stripped away. And so we stood our ground and not only won back the rights they tried to take away or took away, but we got a few more. And then everything kind of settles down for a little bit. And then when it comes up again, the same thing sort of happens. And so I think ultimately what we have to do is keep asserting our right to be anywhere we want to be, just like everyone else has. We have a right to full representation in entertainment, in the media, and everything else. And we just have to know that these times pass. They don't last forever. And we have to keep pushing forward. And I think that, as odd as this is going to sound, and I hope it doesn't come across terribly, but I think there is something beautiful in, you know, being part of a community and being part of a movement in those more challenging times and saying, we got to participate in ensuring things are better for the next generation that are going to come up behind us. And that even if they face challenges, hopefully the challenges they face are not as difficult. For the trans community, this is an extremely difficult time. And so
Yeah.
I think this is where allyship and working together and the entire LGBTQ community coming together and standing together is going to be important. I think any attempt to sort of sow division within the community is ill conceived. Even if there are differences in the community, this isn't the time that we're dealing with that. This is the time where we have people who are losing their lives, who are either by force or because they feel like they have no other option. And they need our support. And so this is the time we all stand to. We're much more powerful as a group than we are as individuals or even individual small groups. We're much better when we band together. And I think as part of that, we need to recognize, and this may be a controversial statement, but that there's no such thing as a perfect ally. We have to accept our allies as they are. Our allies are not going to accept 100% of what we believe all the time. And that's going to require us to hopefully, provide some additional education to them. But if they are willing to stand with us, let them stand with us during the fight. And then we can sort of help move them along, hopefully to become a more, no such thing as perfect, but maybe a better ally afterwards. But we shouldn't be pushing people out just because maybe they don't agree with 100% of what we want. If they're going to stand with us, let them stand with us.
I love that. And you've clearly seen my notes because I was going to talk about allyship. That's actually the very next thing I wanted to bring up.
Sorry.
So perfect timing. So we hear obviously allyship, and you just spoke about it. Like we hear it about a lot, but it can mean very different things depending on the person or the situation, especially right now. What does meaningful allyship look like to you right now?
I think right now, meaningful allyship to me would be standing with me or standing with the community when it's not popular for you to do so. When there is something at stake for you, if you are still standing with me, then that is meaningful. If you're only standing with me when things are good and there's absolutely no risk or consequence for you in joining me in this cause, that's less impressive, right? It's nice that, you're standing with me in the good times, but if you don't stand with me in the bad times, how much of an ally are you? So I really think meaningful allyship is when someone is going to stand with another group through the good times, but also through the bad times where there could potentially be social consequences or otherwise for them, and they do it anyways.
I love that. And you've clearly seen all of my follow-up questions because you just covered like all of them. And like
Trying to keep us efficient here.
exactly. I'm just like, oh wow, he just brought up that. Oh, he just brought up that. But that's all good. So one of the things we happened to chat about in our earlier conversation was about physical challenges from skydiving, your skydiving experience in Australia, to my own personal experience running, swimming, obstacle courses. What of those kinds of challenges taught you about confidence, fear, and growth?
I think a lot of this comes back to what I said earlier about it's important to stretch your boundaries and put yourself in uncomfortable situations because that's how you grow. When I was in Australia, I didn't ever have some sort of desire or need as I was growing up. As you watch people skydiving, I never said to myself, that is something I have to do. It was one of those situations where we were with a group of friends and we were backpacking around, and they said, let's go up to the northern part of Australia, and they have bungee jumping and skydiving, and let's go skydiving over the Great Barrier Reef. And I had to ask myself, am I willing to do this? Am I crazy enough to do this or not? And I'm not suggesting everybody go jump out of an airplane. And in fact, I will probably never do it again in my life. But in that moment, it was, I'm terrified of this. I'm not a good flyer at the best of times. So getting me to jump out of a plane when I'm already scared of being on the plane and free falling to the earth didn't appeal to me in any way. But I'm not going to let it stop me. I'm not going to let that fear stop me. And so anytime you can sort of ask yourself, A, is my fear rational? If it's rational, maybe you just don't do it, right? Like I'm not going to jump into a volcano. But if there's a reasonable amount of irrationality to that fear, whether it's getting on a plane. I mean, it could be for some people going and doing any sort of public speaking. For some people, that is a true fear. Making yourself do it anyways is how you grow. And you may never do it again, but it's an experience you're always going to take something from. And I think as you learn to sort of put yourself in those situations, it becomes easier the next time you face something challenging where you start to get more uncomfortable because you know from experience that you can handle it and that there can be success on the other side. And so you'll become less risk averse in situations where maybe you don't have to be as nervous as you are. And you're more willing to kind of take that chance. And I think that just makes life more exciting, right? Because you experience more things, you'll meet more people, you'll do things you never thought you were able to do. And they become stories that you can tell down the road, and they help build who you are as a person. They change who you are as a person. And I think they just make you a more interesting person as
Oh, for
opposed to
sure.
someone who
Yeah.
never does anything.
I 100% agree with you because even with me, even the challenges I put myself with for my own personal experiences with running, as I joked with you on our pre-chat, I hate running, but I did it because I knew it was overall good for me. Overall, it's actually swimming's actually better for you. But and then the obstacle courses that I did, was it ridiculous? Oh my gosh, it was ridiculous. But I feel so much more accomplished in my life and in challenges that I put forth now than I ever did before that. Because I know that if I can do that and put myself in somewhat risky situations, then I can do pretty much anything.
Yeah,
And
and those
and I
those challenges are like there's a bunch of you're like climbing over walls. I've never done one, so I'm curious to hear this story from you, but you're crawling under barbed wire and you're doing, of course, if you can do that, you can go talk to 10 people on a stage, 20 people, 30 people on a stage and just share your story. That you have much less
exactly.
to lose in that situation. So I really appreciate that. And I do want to hear more of that story though.
Well, and I mean, it is funny because I thought it was ridiculous at first, and I massively failed my first obstacle course. But I mean, it took me way too long. No human should take that long to do an obstacle course. But it's because I hadn't trained because I didn't know what to do. And then after that first one, I was like, okay, well, now I need to do this and I need to do this. And as much as I, mentioned just a little bit earlier, as much as I disliked running, guess what? Running was a part of it because you ran from obstacle to obstacle. And so climbing up walls and then jumping like 20 feet down was kind of like, are you serious? I'm doing this? I'm like, what? And yeah, and crawling in mud and having like, barbed wire above your head. It was like such a rush. I mean, I have a feeling probably similar to when like, doing skydiving. I mean, that rush of when you first jump out, like there's nothing like that we can normally do just in everyday life. And I feel that you're right. Me getting out, doing that, I have zero fear of getting in front of people because I mean, obviously I purposely made it a point to chat with everyone and anyone to bring them onto this platform, onto my platform. But also, I know that I want to share these messages that even if they might be uncomfortable, I know at the end of the day, they need to be heard, they need to be said. And especially, and I'll say it again and again until the man's dead. This current political climate is awful and it's hurting our community. And I feel that those who can come on and share the successes, the wins, how, that they've endured and they've come out on top, just can share to the others in our community that it is possible. We
Yeah.
can make these, I don't fully like the phrase, but it's going to get better. It is going to get better. And I think we have to go through kind of just as us in general growing up. We go through a lot of challenges. And I feel that once we get through those challenges, we know how to come out and be more successful on the other side. And I feel that this is what's going to help us as a community. Like you said, this is the best time for us to come together and to bond and to be together. As much as you might have an issue with maybe some of our other people in our, in the broader spectrum of the LGBTQ plus community, at this point, who cares? You need to come together because at this point, we really need the strength, the support. We need it more than ever. And like we spoke about allyship, like it is really important to make sure you have those strong allies around you. And if they're not going to be that strength, that support for you, hate to tell you, you might want to say bye-bye. We'll come back later, maybe, because you need that, you need that strength and that support right now.
And I think you
100%.
raised something really interesting here because you talked about the first race you did, which you did not do very well at. And we all go through that where we lose. And there's as much value in the lessons you get from the losses because they help you sort of build up the skill set that you need to win next time. I think that's true in the current political climate with our fights. Any losses, we sort of walk away and we say, what did we learn? How do we do better next time to ensure success in the end? I think even with allies. So in the last example you gave, those people who sort of shy away when things are tough and we say, listen, you just have to walk away. That's a lesson for them because then they walk away and say, I've lost someone important to me. Why? And hopefully they learn from that. And the next time they're needed as an ally, they can come forward and stand with you, even in those more difficult times. So I think it's important to say it doesn't have to be success. Success is not always going to be the outcome of everything we try to do. But we
Right.
learn probably more from the losses than we do from the successes. And then those losses ultimately, hopefully, get us to the point of success.
You just said it perfectly. It's that learning. It's that learning process is probably actually what's the most important. Hopefully you learn something out of the experience. Like I mean, I didn't become a high school 4-year letterman just out of the heck of it. I worked hard. I trained hard. I made a point to make sure I got there. I was much more successful after that first obstacle course because I knew what to do. I knew, and I kind of, as weird as it was kind of fun to challenge myself to do, okay, this one's a little bit harder. Okay, let's try this. And it did help when you have friends that are going to join in and like, hey, let's do this all together. And so you got to go through these challenges together. And I feel that when you do something as potentially something I could not do, and I give you massive kudos to jumping out of a plane doing skydiving. I have a friend who has done it multiple times. I'm like, that's cute. That's not happening. I'm never going to do that.
I have to
But
confess something here before you go on. It's a tandem skydive when you're
oh
doing it
yeah, I
with
mean,
one time. So there's someone strapped to my back doing I'm the only skill I have is fall forward and put your arms out and do nothing else. So there was no skill on my part. I just wanted, not oversell what I did here.
well, no, I mean, and I get like, and my friend does the tandem as well, but I think that it's that some people don't even want to do that. They have that true fear of falling per se, but
Yeah.
and I don't know for like, as if I was, because I'm in my 50s, I was 30 years younger, maybe I might do it. In my 50s, that ain't happening. Tandem or not, it's not happening. No way. No, no, no way. So, to kind of piggyback on that, so how has your relationship with risk and challenge changed as you've gotten older?
I think I'm more willing to embrace it. I'm not as adverse to it. So, when I was younger, I would do everything I could to avoid situations that made me feel uncomfortable. Even if it was just a social risk. So someone rejecting you or not wanting to talk to you. I was so risk averse that I just avoided anything where I thought there was a chance I could get hurt emotionally or physically. The more you sort of realize, like we talked about, that, loss can be a success and that it's a learning experience, the more open you are to trying it. And I think as I've gotten older, I'm more willing to take those risks, maybe not skydiving again, but other risks in, in career and in my social life, willing to put myself out there more because I'm more confident in who I am, because I know that, I can go through something difficult, and whether I win or lose at whatever it is, I come out the other side as a better person. And I know that will ultimately be the outcome going forward too. So I think I would say the answer to that is I embrace it a lot more than I used to.
I would agree with that. And one of the things I had people challenge me to coming out, even just with this podcast. They're like, wait, you're going to do what? You're going to come out with this? I'm like, yeah, because our community needs this voice. And I'm putting it out there. I'm putting it on every single platform that I am physically on because it still needs to be heard. There's always going to be the haters. There's always going to be people challenging us. But I feel that from day one, I knew that this had to come out. And I knew that we needed this. And the funny thing is, this is for everyone to listen to. And I feel that even allies listening to our conversations that I've had with many people over the last year and a half are just as important with those who are part of our community, because I feel like the allies they really might need to listen because they're probably going to learn a little bit more of what's really going on with us in our community.
And I think that's the funny thing. Everything we talk about, the lessons learned, the challenges we face, while the specifics of the challenge can be a little different, everybody goes through these in one way or
Hmm.
another. And so we sometimes look at ourselves and we say what we face is unique. And yes, the specifics of it are going to be unique. But you could sort of extrapolate the themes of what we're discussing and apply it to literally every person in every group. And so you're 100% right. I think the value in the podcast that you're doing is not just to the benefit of the LGBTQ plus community. I think there's value, when we talk about careers and we talk about challenges and how to grow within a career, everybody can relate to that in one way or another. And they
Hmm.
may not experience the exact same types of challenges we have, but they have their own challenges and the lessons are going to be the exact same. So, yeah, kudos to you, because I really do think platforms like this make a huge difference for everybody across the spectrum.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And you're right, because guess what? A straight male, a straight female, whatever, they might still mask themselves in the workplace. They may not want to feel authentic. They may not want to be coming out of their shell they may not come out of a closet like is, typical in our community, but they might in a way, they might still do it. They're just not doing it in how we describe it. And they also don't have to come out every single time something happens in their life, or they change jobs, or they change whatever it might be. So but I agree. This really is made for everyone. So thank you. So, all right, going to completely change focus.
All right,
All right. So we've been real, we've been deep, and now we're going to get mildly unhinged, but in the best way. This is my favorite time of my podcast. This
let's
is my
go.
rapid fire questions.
Go for it.
All right. Quick answers only. So
Gosh,
try to do
okay.
your best. And I say just try to do your best. It doesn't
Deep breath.
always happen. But one word you would use to describe your younger, adventurous self.
Fearful. Always
Nice.
fearful, but never willing to let that stop me.
Would you rather, well, I kind of know this, but would you rather go skydiving again or have to ski a black diamond run tomorrow?
Neither? Do I have to pick one?
I mean, I
I
would say neither.
I'll say skydiving only because there's someone else responsible in those tandem dives for everything that happens, whereas skiing down a black diamond run, you're on your own. So because I can
Yes.
shift responsibility, I'll say skydiving.
All right, I like that. Yeah, whew. I mean, yeah, you're on your own skiing that black diamond. Yikes. No, thank you. Didn't like them for a reason. Still don't. I mean, I'm glad I challenged myself to do it when I was younger, but
Right?
now, nope, not happening. All right. What is one professional myth you wish we could retire forever?
Well, that you can tell how capable someone is just by looking at them. I
Oh, that would
think,
be awesome.
yeah, I think those first impressions are brutal and seldom accurate. And so I
Hmm.
think we need to retire this concept that first impressions are the most important. I think they're not.
All right. If your career had a theme song, what would the title be?
Is this like a real song that I'm picking or am I making one up?
You can make one up.
Because I would say I will survive. But I mean, I think that's the theme song for the LGBTQ plus community, anyways. And it's the
Yes.
first thing that pops into my head. So I'm going to stick with that. I will
All
survive
right.
because no matter what happens, I'm going to keep pushing through.
Love that. All right. What is one thing that instantly helps you feel more grounded before a big professional moment?
This is going to sound really weird, but I have ADHD and I have these magnetic fidget toys that I can play with. And I find that the sort of movement of them and the clicking of them really calms me. It distracts me from what's making me nervous. So I would say that is probably what I use most. The other would probably be just breathing, getting control of my breath. And if I can focus on my breathing and slow my breathing, I can shift my mindset much more easily than when I'm starting to get anxious or panic.
Nice. All right. So, Ryan, for the LGBTQ plus professional, entrepreneur, or leader listening today who feels like they are constantly having to prove themselves, navigate assumptions, or stay strong in a difficult climate, what encouragement would you want them to leave with today?
You are every bit as good as you know you are, and no one else knows you better than yourself. So your opinion is the only one that matters.
Love that. That is that is such good advice. So Ryan, thank you so much for being here, bringing such a thoughtful mix of professional insight, lived experience, definitely humor and honesty to this conversation. I really appreciate having you here today.
I had a blast. Thank you so much for having me.
What I really appreciate is that we talked about bias from so many angles, just not just as something that exists in a system or investigations, but as something LGBTQ plus professionals often have to navigate in everyday career moments. We talked about confidence, credibility, allyship, political pressure, and the importance of fairness and humanity in the workplace. So again, thank you.
Thanks so much.
So, for anyone listening or watching, I hope this episode reminds you that your identity is not a liability. Your lived experience can deepen your insight, strengthen your leadership, and help you see people and systems with more clarity. And obviously, if you're in a season where you feel stuck, disconnected, burned out, or unsure of your next move, you don't have to figure it out alone. I help professionals reconnect with their purpose, rebuild confidence, and take aligned action toward careers where they can thrive. Thank you so much for listening to Empowered and Out, the career coaching podcast. Be sure to subscribe, share this episode with someone who needs it, and connect with me, Coach John at Empowered and Out Coaching. Until next time, keep showing up with purpose, confidence, and the courage to be fully yourself.